Hello. Oh, there's 4 people here. I'm so happy. Um, I'd love to know who you are. Is if you can, in the chat, say hello and let me know who you are so I can say hello, and I'm very excited to see you here. It's currently Thursday, the 15th of April, and we're talking today about hobbies and the hobby of spirit keeping. Now, for some people, there's actually I Googled spirit keeping, and what showed up was this field of sharing with people or living with spirits in a sense, like taking care of other people's spirits. And I don't know anything about that, except this is not about that. This is not about taking care of other people's spirits. This is about you taking care of your spirit. Hi, Fred. Thanks for coming. And so the idea is that so often we think of spirituality as being an incredibly serious devotion, dedication process, when in fact, for most of us, it's actually starts out with dabbling and tinkering and thinking about and trying out things that seem relevant and may deepen our spirituality, but we start with something that we're curious about. So for instance, the metaphysical pursuits we think of being spiritual. So in a sense, the tarot card or astrology or numerology, dowsing. There's all these different elements of metaphysical processes that we associate with spirituality is not spirituality, but is getting us in that direction, in a sense that when we dabble or engage with the metaphysical world, we begin to have a relationship with something outside our 3D reality. And as we have a different relationship with our 3D world and say, oh, wow, there's so much more, then we can begin to explore and expand ourselves to even experience the divineness, the sacredness of life. And that's where the spirituality element comes in. When we begin to experience directly that we are an aspect of the divine, and how do we want to expand and explore that to greater and greater degrees. Hi, Marge. Thanks for being here. So this came about because I've been doing about 3 months of these lives, or 2 to 3 months of these lives. And as I'm studying and preparing and figuring out what is it I really want to say, I realized the degree to which my hobby in fish keeping actually informs me about a lot of things in life. And I realized that many of us take on spirituality, like I said, as a hobby. We don't use those words because it's supposed to be, for most of us, a serious pursuit. But in actuality, we start our pursuit of spirituality or spiritual development or spiritual awareness from a place of exploring, like we would do any hobby or any ideas that we're curious about. So what I want to say first, we have about 60 minutes together. And what I want to explore is, how do we start a hobby, or how do we start this thing that we're calling a hobby of spirit keeping? How do we start that? What keeps us engaged and growing that? What has us think? Where do we get stuck in terms of thinking, okay, I already know enough, I don't need to know anything more? And where do we stall out, or where do we quit? So these are the elements of every single hobby or anything we take on as a pursuit of interest. And at some point we quit or we continue to grow. George Leonard wrote a book called Mastery, little book, but so powerful. Is an Aikido master. And so he talks about the practice of becoming a master, which is fascinating. Hi, Ash. Nice to see you. Aisha, that's you. Hi, nice to see you. Thanks for coming. So we begin any pursuit from a sense of either, a lot of people start spirituality by saying, oh, I'm supposed to do that, I should do that. But so many of us pursue a hobby or or a sport or some practice because we have a curiosity. I want to know a little more about that. I want to know what that's like. For me, with the fish, when we were little kids, we had an aquarium, and my mom always had to throw out the dead fish and and it wasn't very interesting. But at some point, I got, I got I got struck. It was like starstruck by the idea of having fish, especially koi. They're so beautiful that I knew I had to start it. And I knew nothing. I just had a basically a barrel, and I started with that. Put fish in it, put water in it, see what happens. And as I was doing that, I would begin to explore and experience. The fish were growing. I needed a bigger container, so I put in a bigger pond, and then it's like, I need aeration, I need water to get in, and I need filtration. All of these little elements that I didn't know that I didn't know that I needed until I started the process. So when we're thinking about taking on spirituality as a hobby, there's something, like I said, the metaphysical elements of spirituality that we may encounter that goes, that's really fascinating. I want to have a tarot reading, or I want to learn how to read tarot. The phenomenon of that is very interesting. And the same in terms of taking it to those experiences of out of body experiences, people who can astral travel. And some people see that as a spiritual practice, and it can be. But the difference is, when are we doing it to grow and expand our sense of divine connection versus when is it something that we do as an ego thing, from like we're pursuing something for the sake of self-identification, um, not self-wisdom and not self-expansion. There is some of that, but the difference is, when are we developing ourselves in relation to our greatest capacity, our greatest potentiality, our greatest sense of mastery, just for the sake of that we have this ability. And when are we doing it for our ego's sake? So, for instance, somebody might take up skiing because they want to look cool on the slopes. They want to wear the fashionable things. They want to have the right skis. They want to look good. So that's not necessarily the sense of where we're going in terms of a hobby of spirituality. But a lot of people take on spirituality for a number of reasons that aren't about personal growth. It's about, again, it's the both and. I want to learn about this. I want to learn about, so for instance, there are spiritual groups, spiritual organizations, spiritual institutes, ashrams, religions, churches that have specific ideas of what to learn and how to do that. And there's a lot of people that engage in those different organizations for the sake of spiritual growth. But quite often that spiritual growth is about bypassing their human growth. In a sense, they're learning all these ways of being spiritual, supposedly, but it's not integrating their life experiences. So they're avoiding fears, they're avoiding themselves in so many ways. And where we're avoiding ourselves, we're missing the opportunity to grow and know ourselves. And my experiences and my truth is, my spiritual principle, one of my spiritual principles, is we are here in these human experiences, in these human bodies, to grow and to learn. And that to me is so important. I listened to a fellow this week. His name is Christian Sundberg, and he's been interviewed by a number of people on YouTube. And Christian remembers what it was like before he was in this lifetime. He remembers life between life. And he remembers a lot of different things. And one of the things he remembers is why he decided to come back. He had talked to a spiritual being who was just phenomenally powerful in the most beautiful way, loving and kindness and power in just this beautiful way. And Christian says, I want that. What do I need to do to get that? And this being says, well, you've got to go and you've got to face your fears. And so Christian came into life, and that's a longer story. But what I believe is very similar, is that we came here to learn things, and to experience things in such a way that we move our sense of self into a more expanded sense of our essence self, our essential element that is divine and sacred. And that has to do with, when we're in a state of love, we're in a higher frequency that feels so wonderful. And we want more of that. And that's in a sense what this being that Christian saw. He was this higher frequency. Lower frequencies are based on fear-basedness, and density of what fear does to us. And so we human beings have been immersed in this density of our fears, and our consensus reality, as we've talked about before, compresses us because it is so fear-based. And if we're looking at this as a hobby, we're going, okay, I don't want to be so afraid anymore. So how do I begin this hobby of knowing myself? How do I begin this hobby of exploring the elementariness of this process? Because quite often, I say because, but quite often, our churches or our spiritual groups kind of inundate us with so much information as we become overwhelmed. And how do we make this simpler? Make this simpler by saying, okay, how do you start any hobby? Where are you most inspired to start a hobby or be connected in this regard in terms of spirituality? So is it a metaphysical element like tarot or astrology or crystals or dowsing? I started many ways in terms of, another one would be the synchronicities of life. Like, how does that work? Or intuition. Like, I have intuitive experiences. How do I cultivate more of that? We have another element of the metaphysical is we have these abilities to see or hear or know or feel or sense something beyond what we think is the 3D world. And we go, wow, I want more of that. And so how do we do that? And again, I keep coming back to what I want for this session, what our time together is to explore. How do we do that? And how do we ignore and go away from that? And it's very challenging, as you all know. I'm going to check my notes here first because I want to begin with, again, we have a sense of that we should know how to do this spiritual path, that we should know how to do what we should know how to do. And the fact is, we start anything from this place of, I don't know what I don't know. And that in itself is extremely uncomfortable for people. It's that place, that unknowing, that uncertainty. And whether you're starting fish hobby, fish keeping, or beekeeping, or skiing, or Aikido, whatever it is, or meditation, there's a point where you go, I don't know anything. I don't know what I don't know. And that's a very uncomfortable place to go. And so a lot of times people will just pick up their Facebook, it's not that, but they pick up their iPhone or they pick up something and go, okay, I want to immerse myself into the known, what I know. And that makes us feel comfortable and safe, but it doesn't allow us to expand our abilities to be with what is possible, the potentiality. And the only way we can know that is to begin at the place where we don't know what we don't know. When I got my aquarium, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I killed a lot of fish. I didn't kill them intentionally. I used the analogy a lot of this practice of keeping fish because I didn't know what I didn't know until the fish got sick. And it was like, what's going on? What don't I know? So I did some reading and I did some talking to people. I did some video listening and I got to see what I didn't know that could potentially help me. And so I began there and then keep climbing that ladder of, I don't know that yet. I don't know how to do that yet. That I don't know what I don't know. Marge says, I noticed how I felt around some money issues and I didn't like how that felt. There was a fear of loss and a sense of greed that I didn't want to see in myself. Yuck. Yeah. And that, if we were to look at how do we use that as a hobby, if we're looking at the hobby of keeping money, Marge says she wants to change the energy of that. So, Marge, what would you like that to be if you don't want the fear of loss and the sense of greed and you want to change that? What is it that you want to experience? So, fear of loss and greed is kind of a dense, yucky, constrained experience. And if you're aware of that, when we're aware of that density, that feeling that's uncomfortable, we can go, I don't want to feel this. And if we know that, then the hobby in itself can be the practice, or part of the hobby is practicing going, okay, I don't like this feeling. What could I feel? When do I feel more generous? When do I feel more prosperous? Where do I feel more giving? Where do I feel more expanded? Like, we can ask ourselves those questions, and it's phenomenal what shows up. So Marge says, instead of feeling the fear of loss, what she wants to feel is the sense of abundance and a generosity. So it's like, okay. So Marge, I'm going to just ask one question is, do you know that experience of that abundance and generosity? Do you know that sense of what that's like for yourself? I'm going to suspect she's going to say yes to that question. And this is an interesting thing I was going to bring up, is that I learn things in different elements and different parts of my life. And quite often I can say, oh, that's related to that. That is about fish keeping, or that is about sailing, or that is about parenting, or that is about writing. And I have these contexts and these interpretations that I make that are related to only those areas. But what's very wonderful to me about transformational work is when we can say, how I do one thing is how I do everything. Or how I be in one context is most likely how I be in other contexts. And so with Marge, she says, yes, she knows that sense of abundance and generosity. But she probably knows that from other areas in her life. But when she thinks about that money, she goes, she gets all constrained and constricted. When she thinks about this other place where she's generous and has a sense of abundance and freedom and love, she expands. So this hobby is, for me, looking at, okay, over here, I'm what I want to be all the time. Over here, I'm feeling this constriction. I don't want to feel that constriction at all. How do I make that different? So again, what I want to keep doing is relating this, whether I do it well or not. What I want to do is keep relating this to, how do we do a hobby? How do we do something and we find that it's a struggle or it's a challenge? How do we shift so that we can look at our spiritual challenges or our life challenges from this perspective of, oh, if this was a hobby, how would I look at this differently so that I can shift more easily into a different perspective, as opposed to saying, okay, I'm shutting this down, don't want to know anymore, quitting the hobby. If all my fish died, I would be pretty sad, and I would feel very dis just dis. And I would want to probably go, I don't want to do this anymore, because there's a loss, there's a risk. This is another piece of taking on any hobby, is when we're looking at, oh, I'm really excited about this, or I really am passionate about this, but it's going to cost me too much in terms of time, money, space, whatever. We're looking at the risks involved. So money is a really good example of that. And in the month of May, I'm going to focus on prosperity as a spiritual practice. So when Marge brings up that when she has some money and it creates a sense of constriction, then, but over here, she has a sense of expansion. It's like, how is she seeing this that keeps her from allowing that expansiveness? How is she, what are the dynamics here? And it's like, how do we translate what she knows to over here? So again, if I'm out in my yard, I have a few different ponds, and one I put a fountain in, and I want to raise the fountain up so that it's high enough that it looks good. So how do I translate what I know about building things up in such a way that it will translate into how I do what I need to do over here? I know some things. I know some things because I have experience. And there's a part of me that goes, "Oh, you don't know anything. It's going to fall down, and don't even try." But if I look at, so what do I know about building things? What do I know about weight distribution? What do I know about? I start to utilize and empower myself. I utilize what I do know and what I have experienced over in a different context. And I can translate that into this context, whatever that is. I do that with my clients all the time. They come in and they say, "I don't know how to be different. I don't know how to get out of a relationship. I don't know how to leave my job. I don't know how to change my relationship with my children." These are big things that people say. I don't know how to do that. So I say, where in your life have you left your job, a job? When in your life have you left something? And they will tell me. They will give me an example. And I'll say, where have you left a relationship? And they say, here's where I left a relationship. And I'll say, where have you shifted how you were being in relation to somebody else? And they would tell me. So what they do is they give me evidence of the fact that they have experience, given their different hobbies, their different contexts, their different orientations in the world or different circumstances. And they're able to say, here's where I made those choices. Here's where I made those changes. And so it's like, oh, you already know how to do this because you have done it in a different context. And what's different about this context? What makes it harder, difficult, challenging? How is it that you don't know how to do it when actually you've had a lot of experience doing it? So when we can look at our relationships with either personal development or spiritual development in the context of what we already know, what we've already experienced over here in these different hobbies or these different places, we can begin to connect our knowing and our wisdom and where we have learned and where we empowered ourselves to make those changes. And we go, wow, I kind of feel self-empowered right now. I kind of get that I have more of me than I thought. And it's a very wonderful experience, as you already know, because you've had these experiences many, many times, I'm sure. Marge says, I'm generous with baked goods, but I can be really penny pinching. Yes. And so she's looking at, how do I get out of that dense vibration or frequency and shift to something higher? And when we are in that state of saying, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to do this, then it's disempowering, and it feels like we're helpless, and we're in this place of, I don't know what I don't know, and I don't know how to do it different. But if we say, okay, where have you been generous? Where have you been confident? Where have you been trustworthy? Where have you felt safe? All of these places, then quite often the database, in a sense, opens up and goes, oh, I have this experience of being generous with baked goods. Doesn't matter how much it costs to buy the things that I need to buy to create the baked goods to give it away. Still money, right? Still the use of money for something. In this case, it's going out with generosity. In this case, it's like, whoop, this fear and this contraction. Fred says, can the fear of loss come from past memories? Absolutely. If we think about, and if you know spiritual practices, 99% of them say, now is all there is. And in a now, the nowness of now, there is no fear unless you decide you bring it in. So fear is about control. Fear is about creating more fear. Fear is about the past. So if we want to be true to ourselves, and again, this is for me a spiritual principle that in the divinity and the sacredness of the universal source of all that is the universe, there's no fear. There's no fear. And anyone I've spoken to that have had spiritually transformative experiences of whatever kind, they go, there is no fear in the other worlds. The 4% that we live in this reality, 4% is all we know of our 100% of my being. I only know 4%. So 96% of me is what I can't see. So my experience of fear is this much of my wholeness, my totality. And we've been taught and trained over and over again to be in fear, worry, be very afraid, be very afraid. And so that is all from the past. That's all from the past. And so we can have to, again, this is part of the hobby of thinking differently as we're growing our capacity to know what we know, because basically we're saying, I don't know what I don't know, or I don't know how to be without fear. That's true, sort of, because there are times that I'll say this to people say, I don't know how to be without fear. And I'll go, have you ever been on a sailboat and it was doing this and that? And they go, yeah. And it's like, were you fearful? No. It's like, okay, so you know what it's like to not be fearful. Yeah, that's true. Tell me more about that. And so by talking about that moment of the fearlessness, they become empowered and remember in themselves that state of being. And then when we do that, we get to cultivate in that remembering. We remember and remember, and we go, yeah, that's the one I want to remember. That's the one I want to stay with, not the constricted, the constrained, the fearful. It's shifting. It's choosing to shift to what we want to believe and what we know to be true. I know this is true, and because I've gotten to a point where it's like, I've had enough experiences that I know it's true. But before I had these experiences, I relied on the fact that other people who I respected had similar experiences to what I wanted to experience. So I was willing to say, okay, I'm going to take a leap of faith and shift my thinking, try it out, experiment. Again, with the hobby, we experiment. Can I do this? Can I do this? And see what happens. And so that's always fear-based, always fear-based. Fred comes over quite a lot because I need a little bit of hand-holding when it comes to doing stuff I feel uncomfortable doing. And just having another person there, I do things that I'm afraid of doing if I were alone, but just having another presence there makes a difference for me. But there's some question that I have in my mind. Can I do this alone? And of course I can do it alone. My preference is I don't want to. So if I can get someone like Fred to come over and do it together, it's more fun. And I grow my confidence to say, I can do this. So we're doing this over and over again. As we grow our spiritual capacities, we are continually facing that edge of not knowing. Thank you, Fred. Fred says you're welcome. We're continually, any hobby, any mastering that we take on, whether it's cooking or skydiving, cutting down trees, gardening, every single element will bring us up to our challenging us with the not knowing. I know this much. Now I know I don't have my light on my tank, but now I know how to do basically fish keeping 101. I'm pretty good at it. I bought some new little tiny baby little red shrimp. They're live after a week. I'm just thrilled about that. So I have a basic knowing, but every time something happens, it's going to push me up against my edge of fear of failure, fear of humiliation, fear of killing something, fear of doing it wrong, fear of what will people think. all of those fears come up, and that slows me down or stops me. That's true for these hobbies, any hobby, or it's in terms of spiritual development. There's so many realities out there, so many truths, so many orientations of what spirituality should be. What I'm saying is blasphemous to some of those people out there. And I feel okay about that because I really am honoring my own knowing, as opposed to saying, well, I better stay with this idea or better stay with that idea, or I better do it the way I was taught or the way that everybody else is doing it, as opposed to saying, no, this is my truth. This is my way. The same with my aquariums. It's like I'm learning how to integrate what I've learned from other people into what's true for me. We do this with spirituality. Everyone's spirituality, that is their relationship with their spirit self, is unique. And even though I'm saying what I'm saying to give you a context of how are you in a hobby? How are you in an idea of what you do? How are you in a relationship? Relationships we're always in relationship with what we create, whether it's a garden or an aquarium or a dog or a child or a partner. That's the relationship that we're creating. And how are you in those relationships? It's very telling about what's going to show up for you in relation to everything else, because how we basically do one thing is how we basically do everything else. We have a context of where we feel safe and where we feel we're at risk, and we're always balancing that. And this state of knowing that you are an aspect of the divine is like, okay, how do I live into that to a higher degree? How do I practice that to a higher degree? And that can be as simple as, where are you kind? Where do you choose to be kind? Where do you choose to be unkind? So when you are being unkind, you are choosing to be unkind. Doesn't matter how much spiritual practice you've had, doesn't matter how many whatevers you've learned and how many meditation hours you've done. When you're unkind, you're choosing to be unkind. And kindness is a practice. It's a big spiritual practice. Dalai Lama said, if you practice nothing else in terms of cultivating spirituality, cultivate the practice of kindness. And sometimes I have found it, and I've said this to you before, I have found it hard to be kind to people. And that's not about them, that's about me. And if I'm wanting to cultivate myself as a spiritual being, in the sense of everyone, everything is an aspect of the divine, then I'm always continuing to be mindful of, how do I practice seeing every single person as an aspect of the divine, always seeing the love inside them, always seeing the presence inside, the preciousness. How do I do that? Where do I ignore that? Where do I judge? Where am I unforgiving, which will be a live that we'll be doing in a couple of weeks? Where am I remaining unforgiving? These are all elements of this hobby of becoming mindful, becoming clear about, ooh, I say I'm a spiritual person, and I am a spiritual person. I am in the evolution of my spiritual development. And there are places where I am less mindful of my activities in relation to the hobby of cultivating my relationship with my spiritual self. Alicia says, yes, fear is the past. Love that. So yes, fear is the past. Fear is a way of controlling ourselves and other people. It's a way of the conscious collective, the unconscious collective of reality. It's been so around so long, we think it's natural and normal to be afraid. And so part of this practice, this hobby, if you will, is to say, where am I afraid? And I don't need to be afraid. These are just simple little questions that doesn't have to be a big capital S spiritual practice. It's an everyday, feeding the fish, putting a little more water in, checking the temperature kind of elements of life. Where am I feeling fear today? Is that a fear that's a necessity? Should I feel like I'm in danger? Oh, I've got so much money in the bank. It's not as much as I thought it was, so I'm a little anxious. Is it enough? Yes. Do I need to be afraid? No. Can I practice in this moment letting go of that fear? Yes. But it's that training ourselves to see it and then act on it. So many of us watch these videos or read books and go, wow, I'm really inspired to make a change. And then 2 seconds later, we're back into Facebook or we're into Instagram or someplace and or Netflix. I love Netflix, where I'm going, I'm shutting down and I've totally forgot that I was inspired. So many people have read my book, Self-Empowerment 101, and go, I'm going to go back and read that and do all of the exercise, answer every question. I'm going to do that. And I don't know how many people actually do that because they don't, because we don't, because we would begin to confront that part that doesn't know that we don't know. We don't want to know what we don't want to know. We like being arrogant and righteous and know-it-alls. We like that about ourselves. That's our ego element. And to be humble and go, whoa, wait, I didn't know that is part of the practice. It's part of the practice of any hobby. I have killed so many plants because I didn't know that I didn't know what I didn't know. But as I'm learning and growing, I'm getting more comfortable with this humbleness, this humility, which is a huge part of any spiritual practice, to go, hey, this is the human part of me, and there's another part of me, and I'm learning to be with both. Marge says, so on the way to start one way to start would be to find an edge I'm uncomfortable with and then ponder on exactly what I'm feeling. Beautiful. Then decide what I want to feel and practice that. Absolutely. So simple. So simple. It's like, this is part of what we're immersed in. If we were in an aquarium, this would be part of the water that we're immersed in, is we think that feeling bad we should be okay with feeling bad, in a sense that feeling bad is normal. And feeling fear is normal. Feeling anxious is normal. Feeling those things are normal. And yes, they are. They are. And where can we shift that so that we are empowering ourselves using our choice-making powers to go, wait, do I need to feel bad about that? No. Can I allow myself to feel good about that? I'm working on it. This is one of those places with forgiveness. I'm not good at forgiving, but when I see where I'm unforgiving, I can go, oh, that's about me, because generally when we think about forgiveness, we think about we're forgiving them and now they're off the hook for whatever. When I think of being unforgiving, that's all about me. So we can look at and go, oh, yeah, that unforgiving thing. We'll talk about that more. But I am holding on to something. I am resisting letting go of something. The same with kindness. Where am I unwilling to be kind? So walking down the street in a city, there's a lot of homeless people on the street. And if I ignore and I avoid and I distract myself from the guy that's sitting down there with his hand out, what's that about? As opposed to going, hello, how are you? Having a good day, whatever that is that acknowledges that person and share some kindness. I don't necessarily have the money to share with him, but I can share kindness, generosity of spirit. Watching ourselves where we withhold generosity of spirit, which does not cost one single penny. Fascinating little hobby. Fascinating little hobby. It's great. So yes, where do you feel that sense of a lack of generosity, lack of willingness to give of yourself in any way? And seeing that and then going, okay, how do I want to be with this? How do I want to be in service? How do I want that? We can begin to ask those questions and say, here's what that feels like. Here's where I have been in service that way. Here's what it feels like. I've been listening to Paul Selig and his books, and they're wonderful. They're channeled works from the guides. And one of the questions that was asked in this particular book, and I don't remember which one it was, is I don't remember what I'm reading, um, but it says, when you are in the place of most yourself, like when are you most yourself? What's that experience like? And think about that. Imagine that. So one of those moments is when I'm with my clients and we are in this beautiful, exquisite exploration of a moment in their life where they are truly who they are. And that meanness, connecting with their meanness in that way, it's so awesome. And so they say, where is that? How does that show up? What's the quality of the experience of you in that moment? And then they say, just now take that and know that's who you are. And when you can grow that, you're dismissing and disintegrating all that fear frequency that you realize is not necessary. Where you're in danger, you know that, but where you're saying, "Oh no, I'm just used to that fear," we can change that. And that's fun. That's for me the hobby of this spiritual practice part is we're able to make those choices for ourselves. And in making those choices, we can then begin to simply attune to and attend to the moment that says, oh, there's that belief, there's that feeling that doesn't feel happy, doesn't feel good. And I can change that. And if I can't, I'm going to call my friend Rosie, or I'm going to call my friend whoever, or, do some research or do something so that I get comfortable with what's going on for me. We're always in this state of, I don't know what I don't know. I know this, but now I'm learning something else. And over the last few weeks in expanding my orientation because of Paul Selig's work, it's mind-blowing what is possible for me. That now I know what I don't, now I know that I know what I know. I still don't know what I don't know, but I know that this is really awesome. And I am a much more present to that practice that's going to allow me to expand here. That means looking at where I'm limiting myself because of fear, where I'm limiting myself because of what will people think, or who am I going to hang around with if I'm doing more of this? Where, am I going to be lonely or what? All of the I don't knows are still there, but I can watch myself and pay attention to who I am in this moment and go, yeah, and I know there's so much more. If I am 100% potentiality, I want to explore that. And so it's again, the sense of using the word hobby in that makes it much more simple rather than what's the spiritual practice I have to take on? What's the Sanskrit words I have to learn? What's the prayers and how to do that? What's the indigenous symbolic, whatever, all that stuff. And all of that stuff can be important and valuable, or it's just the matter of the simplicity of how do I be me in this moment? And know that this meanness is my divine contribution to the world. I'm learning that more and more. I get that more and more. I got it from my clients, and I'm totally always saying, you are that. And more, I'm able to bring it to myself and say, wow, that's a big deal. To know that you are a gift, that you are an aspect of the divine, that you don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. You don't have to do anything to prove your worth. You don't. And to me, if we stay clear with that those are big mind-blowing concepts. We hear them all the time, but because we're so constrained in the fear and all of the training of our worthlessness, insignificance, despicableness, we're so immersed in that we don't have a capacity to even begin to go, wait, you mean I don't have to prove myself constantly? Marge says, I live a lot of my life on autopilot. It works just to remember and to notice, and yet it's so worth it. I live a lot of my life on autopilot. It works just to remember to notice. And yes, it is so worth it. The noticing when I'm started with a new client, and that client is like, how do I do this? How do I start? Where do I, the overwhelm of how do I do all of whatever to make my life the way I wanted to get? And it's like, all you have to do is start to notice. And in a sense, in again, coming back to the aquarium fish keeping thing, there's a fellow I listen to. His name is Corey. He owns a store in the Seattle area called Aquarium Co-op, and he does these beautiful live where he's answering questions, much like this. And he says, so many times people will, feed their fish and then they walk away. And then when their fish gets sick or dies, they go, how did that happen? And he says, because what happens is people don't attend to and notice and watch and observe what's happening in their aquarium. It's something that they have and they tend to, but they're not present to it. And that's how so many of us are with our life. We're on autopilot. In fact, you can get an auto feeder for your aquarium, so you don't have to worry about even feeding them. But what's the point of the relationship? Why are you doing what you're doing? And that's all very personal. Doesn't matter. But if we're willing to begin to notice, especially in terms of going, oh, I don't want to feel so much fear. I don't want to feel so much greed and contraction. I really want to feel more freedom and generosity of spirit. Okay, so I got to notice where I'm constraining. And when I notice that, then I'm empowered to choose differently. We cannot change anything that we cannot consciously know. That's just a matter of fact, essentially. So what we know then is empowering because it gives us the opportunity to choose differently. So these simple little practices of going, oh, I just have to be mindful of what I'm thinking. I woke up the other day, I'm practicing being in wonder and delight and love and joyousness, right? I mean, that's a great practice. And I wake up and I looked across the room and I have this painting and I had this negative thought. And I can't even tell you what the thought was. I just had a negative thought and I went, what is that? That's irrelevant to my reality that I'm wanting to create. Now, at some point, if that thought came back, then I could attend to it and clearly notice what it was about, as opposed to the automatic pilot of, oh, that's probably gathering dust, or oh, that should be over another inch and a half, or whatever the dread of the day that I lived with for 60 some years. So to go, nope, you're out is great. It was great because usually those things would last all day. And now I've been able to practice the practice of everyday moments of going, oh, there it is. There's that fear. I can then begin to shift that to being more at choice. When we're at choice, we're empowered to choose. And it doesn't matter what you choose, but that you are empowered to choose is the biggest deal. I want to come back to Christian Sundberg a little bit one more time, because one of the things that he said that was so important to me was he realized that one of the fears that he had to face was being in agony and having no way out. So the fear of being in excruciating pain with no way out. So I bring that up because so many of us will get so far in our spiritual practices or facing fears, facing hard things. But when it comes to harder things, we back away because we have all had the worst of the worst of the worst feeling in the world. Maybe lifetimes ago, maybe ancestral. whatever it is, we have had the worst of the worst, and we were just we were just constrained and like plummeting into infinite horribleness. And we say we never ever want to experience that. But as long as we never ever experience that, we are controlled by it. So when Christian said, I want that sense of love and presence that he experienced in this other being, and he was willing to be committed enough to come back into human form and have that experience, he faced some of the worst of the worst of the worst so that he could dissipate that fear and move on to higher levels of frequency where he can be more expansive in love and kindness and generosity. And that's what he's doing. So that, in a sense, is like, what is the fear that you don't want to feel? What is it that you fear most that you're avoiding? And I think we face it when we take on a hobby and we get to a point of risk and go, okay, I can't risk anymore because it's too scary. I'm going to have to face what I don't want to face. And so I think every relationship we have, whether it's partnering, children, profession, hobbies, relationship with our own bodies in terms of illness, disease, and well-being, we are constantly in the state of what's my greatest fear, constantly. And when we go, okay, I don't want to be living that way, then we have the freedom to choose to face that which scares us the most, so that we can move on and be at our greatest capacities for service. I say service in a sense that being in our greatest capacity to be generous with ourselves, because that's what we are. This capacity to be who we are, which is our divine service to the world. I know that sounds really strange, given that we're so trained to say, oh, you have to be beautiful, or you have to work hard, or you have to be productive, or you have to make a lot of money, or you have to be sexy. All of those things that we're supposed to in order to prove that we're, when the truth is, no, just be yourself in your greatest abilities to be yourself. And that's the gift to the world. I think that's awesome. Myself, I think that's awesome. And that's the work I do with my clients, to say, how do you be you? With the big capital question mark, because it's pretty cool. And I'm privileged to see people in their true essence self while they're practicing that, being with me in that, and then they go and practice it throughout in their regular life. But I get to be with that, and that's just such a gift, such a gift. We have a few more minutes. Any questions that come up? I do want to, and I'll leave you with that question while I just make sure that I wanted to hit on most of the points that I said. That we quit our hobbies, we quit our practices, we quit our things when it gets too risky. It gets too close to being and too scary. We've got where we feel like we have too much to lose. And quite often, disease, illness, loss of a partner or a child or a parent that we're close to, those things tank us. We tank in a sense that they drive us into what we most fear. And my truth is, if I can do this intentionally without being driven to those worst of the worst of the worst, I'm going in that direction, because I don't want to have it foisted on me. In a sense, it's both and that we came here to learn something. And if we're here to learn that and we're truly committed to that, then it's foisted on us. We've talked about that in previous, I'm using the word foisted, but those opportunities are given to us so that we can't escape. The wisdom of no escape. I've got a tank of fish. It's like there's no escape from that currently. So where we are immersing ourselves in the can't quit, you've got cancer, you've been given the terminal diagnosis, you can't quit that. And how do you be with that is what we're talking about. We can quit a lot of things, but at some point we're going to be um, face to face with the things that scare us most. And that's a good thing. Hi, David. Glad you're here. Perhaps there's a balance to what is acceptable risk and fear. What each of us can handle is important. I love what you're saying, and I truly believe that. And this is a saying that we've heard spiritual things, people, whatever, say, is that you're only given what you can handle. And I laugh because sometimes it's a lot. And that's because my experience is, I guess I could handle it because that's what I was given. So there is a balance to what is acceptable risk and fear. And at the same time, how do you say that when a person has just lost their child, or their child is living with cancer and you're with that? Or or you've lost the job, the dream job, or your house burnt down. How do you conceptualize that in terms of that place of balance between what is acceptable risk and fear? Sometimes it's just overwhelming. And that's the big fat B with, isn't it? It's like, how do we learn to be in that state of overwhelm? And many of us with this COVID situation has had us have to be with that state of overwhelm in a way that, again, can grow us to our greater capacities of knowing, our greater capacities of generosity of spirit, or love and compassion. So that's a big one. What I like to think is that we can learn this the way that we learn it. And what I mean by that is that we can. What I'm thinking is, I have a podcast called Spiritual Immersion, Taking the Plunge, and the concept for that is that we can incrementally do a lot of the work ourselves and stay in that place of risk and fear, but what's acceptable and what's enough, and push our own edges, be in total choice about that. And then there's other times where we can't, where we are at choice about things that we're not at choice. um, 9/11, when that building went down, boom, there was so much that it was hard to be with. It was so hard to be with. And so those kinds of things are challenging, and they challenge everyone, and they challenge all of us to the core of our being. And what we do with that in that moment of the challenge is, when we look at all the resources that we have, all the resources within ourselves, where have we been in similar situations where were in such deep despair and brought ourselves through it? Where have we hit bottom? Where have we lost and lost again? And where have we survived and been encouraged and encouraged to strengthen ourselves to come back into living life the best we can? So, anyone else have anything else to say about all of this? The point and the intention of this process was to say, hey, let's keep it simple. Keep these things very simple, because we're just talking about what can we notice, what do we see, what do we want, and what do we need to shift so that we have that. How do we be with don't know what I don't know, and now I know what I know, and I still don't know what I don't know? How do we be with all of that? How are we willing to take the risk? And my point is, we do this all the time with our hobbies and the things that are important to us, where we're singing songs and we just want to sing it a little bit different. Where we want to be playful, but we want to be playful a little bit different, where we want to expand our sense of self. So we do this in so many different places in our lives. And these are just the elements that we know that can support us in growing our spiritual self too. Thank you guys for being here today. And I'd love if you have comments or anything else, please leave them below if you like. And thank you for chatting with me. That makes me very, very happy. And I will see you next week, same time. All right. Bye for now. Thanks, Marge.